I have a very special guest on today's show. This is someone who I've read hundreds and hundreds of his articles over the year, many of which we have published at antiwar.com. He is Dr. Ramzy Baroud, a journalist, author, and the editor of the Palestine Chronicle, which is a critical resource if you want to know what's happening in Palestine, what Israel is doing there. And he's the author of six books. His latest book, co-edited with Elon Pape, is Our Vision of Liberation: Engage Palestinian leaders and intellectuals speak out. His other books, and the one I have read, My Father Was a Freedom Fighter, is absolutely fantastic. And he just has so much important work, all of which can be found at ramzybaroud.net. Dr. Baroud, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Kyle. Great pleasure.
Well, I'm very happy to have you here today. In part, it's not so happy because a lot of the news probably isn't going to be so great, but I really wanted to have you on now because everything that's going on in the Middle East, a lot of the tension has been taken away from Gaza as many people felt like we are on the precipice of a major, major war between the US, Israel, and Iran. And now that maybe that has been averted, at least for some time, I'm glad I have somebody on to try to catch us up on what's happening in Gaza. So, just I guess starting off first, Dr. Baroud, to the best of your ability, what is the situation like for the people in Gaza? I am reading absolute horror stories every day. Tens of thousands, if not more, people are starving. Tens of thousands of children are being treated for acute malnutrition. There's almost no hospitals left. The tents are being bombed. So, from your information, what is the situation like for the Palestinians living there now?
Thank you for that, Kyle. I am gonna talk about this. I'm gonna address this point because it is absolutely critical. But also, I would like to challenge the perception that what is happening in Iran is taking attention away from Gaza. And I know it's quite often being said by many of us who are very much sympathetic with Gaza and very much keen on ensuring that there is this constant focus on the genocide in Gaza until the genocide is over. But when you think about it from a kind of the bigger picture here is that this is Netanyahu's way of trying to escape the his failure to achieve anything of consequence in Gaza. And he has done it before. I mean, he has done it with Lebanon, he has done it in Yemen, and he's doing it with Iran. Everything he's doing here, yes, maybe to distract from the situation in Gaza, but ultimately because he is looking for a bigger victory. He is unable to find that victory in Gaza. 600 days, 625, 27 days now passed and counting, and he can't find the victory is elusive in Gaza. He can't find it. And since he couldn't find it, he is constantly trying to escalate because he hoped that by defeating Hezbollah in Lebanon, he is able to say, well, we defeated a power that is even greater than Gaza. Therefore, we are in a better situation than before, and we redeemed what happened in October 7. And he couldn't find it there. And then he went to Ansarullah, and Trump ended up signing his own ceasefire agreement with Ansarullah, and then he searched for it in Iran. So, in other words, it's all connected. All of it is part of the same, essentially the same war. But now back in Gaza, you have a situation. I mean, really, I was in a conference in Vienna recently, and someone from an activist from Africa, very much pro Palestine, was a bit critical. Says, Ramzi, you described the situation in Gaza as unique. But really, when you think about it, horrific things are happening in Congo, in Sudan, and other parts of the world right now as we speak. And what I try to communicate to that person is that we are not just talking about the uniqueness in terms of the sheer number of people who have been killed, which has now exceeded 56,000. And according to various studies and a Lancet medical journal, it would be a lot more if the war is to stop today. So we are talking about a large chunk or a large percentage of the Gaza population who's just been wiped out completely. And the fact that more and more will be killed or die as a result of the consequences of the war if the war is to stop today. Because you have 36 hospitals that have been destroyed by Israel. You have basically no food in Gaza, period. The only food that comes to Gaza comes with a very high price of a, kind of a price tag of ultimately death. And it's communicated through an American channel, an American organization, a humanitarian foundation of Gaza that is actually set up by Israeli supporters with the hope of having leverage, having political leverage over famine-stricken population. So not only we killed a large number of them, we destroyed their civilian infrastructure entirely. 85 to 90% of Gaza, all Gazans' home are destroyed. All universities, all schools, all water, water wells or any way of trying to um, uh, you know have any kind of drinkable water in Gaza. People are dying in large numbers from easily treatable diseases. That doesn't get reported. We're not keeping track of those numbers at this stage. I mean, who can do so when the doctors themselves, hundreds of doctors and medical workers, have been assassinated by Israel? So you have this absolutely horrific situation, and then the Americans and the Israelis come in kind of dangling a little bit of food, a little bit of milk, a little bit of flour in front of this dying population, getting them, trapping them into these death zones in Netzarim, the central part of Gaza, or Rafah, somewhere at the border between Gaza and Egypt, and killing them in the process, giving them food and killing them in the process. So this is unique in the sense that we know everything that is happening in Gaza. We are fully aware of it. The entire human race is able to understand, mitigate the nature of this genocide, and we're allowing this experiment to continue. People are dying in extremely high numbers, and there's nothing to be done about it in order for Netanyahu simply to prolong the life expectancy of his government just for a few more months. That's it. All of this is just a political ploy. That's it.
Yeah, and so one of the particular horrors going on now, and I know you touched on it a little bit there, but there's a new category of casualties in Gaza, and they're being referred to as aid seekers. And it seems every day. This is an article I wrote just, I believe, yesterday. 25 Palestinians were gunned down by Israeli tanks and drones as they were going to look for aid. And in that article, I found an estimate where 450 people just since the very end of May, so over about 2 or 3 weeks now, have been gunned down while seeking aid. And I'm sure that number is an undercount. That's the minimum. But I mean, this is just a horror that's hard to comprehend, that you would set up these aid sites and then kill the Palestinian civilians as they're going through, and not. And if they were Israeli soldiers who said, "Oh, the Palestinians got too close and we opened fire," that is not justified in any way, but that's a scenario that I think people could understand what happened. But there are tanks and drones that are open firing on these innocent civilians. I mean, these are real horrors. Do you like get the same stories coming out of Gaza that we're getting about the aid seekers?
Absolutely. And again, that contributes to the element of uniqueness because in a war zone, yeah, sure, you will have your category of the number of fighters killed, the number of civilians killed, the number of children now exceeded 20,000, women, I think 17,000. So you have all of these horrific classifications and figures and statistics. And sadly, in the case of Gaza, the very doctors, the very nurses, the very civil defense workers, firefighters, everybody has a category. And the category is not counted by dozens, but by hundreds, and of course, in the case of women and children, by the tens of thousands. And now you have this new category of aid seekers. I mean, how does it even work? How is one to even explain that you create a platform for people who are dying from starvation and you are asking them to come and acquire some food. Why do every single day 20, 30, 40, 50%, 50 people, sometimes at one point there was like a 70 people massacre in single incident? How do you explain that they don't come back? What is the logic? And I know some people might think, well, why do they keep going back? Well, they keep going back because they think that there is that statistical probability they are not going to be among those who are killed, wounded, or arrested. And by the way, many of them or have also been detained and taken to Israel. So because the situation is so dire, your people keep coming back. Probably, if I am in that situation, my entire family is in Gaza right now, and I know some of them are actually going to these. They are part of the aid seekers, and they have to do so because they have no other option but to do so. Now, you would say, okay, why are the people who are giving aids have machine guns and military drones? Why are they involved in this? Well, we had United Nations, we had UNRWA, the United Nations, refugee agency that deals with Palestinians in particular. You've had various other international institutions that provided aid. You had lots of local organizations that worked. So you had a mechanism, and the mechanism was working just fine. But Israel has created numerous obstacles and ultimately announcing the UNRWA, the United Nations agency, they declared it a terrorist organization that collaborates with Hamas. See,
Yeah.
basically left absolutely no margin for any possible aid to enter Gaza except through this deadly mechanism that has claimed the lives of hundreds of Palestinians with thousands of people being wounded.
Well, Dr. Brood, I know this is going to be a somewhat difficult question to answer, but this is something that people are curious about. Of course, we get the numbers from the Gaza Health Ministry that put the dead Palestinians at over 56,000, and I think you detailed that includes tens of thousands of both children and women. So a majority, of course, are civilians. I talked to Dr. Feroz Sinwa on the show in the past, and we went over how he calculated, I believe in October of last year, that the absolute minimum number of deaths in Gaza had exceeded 118,000. And also, I had a private conversation with the Palestinian American last year who had a significant amount of family, friends, and contacts in Gaza who said that, this was, I believe, probably a year ago in May, said that there's no way that the death toll is under 100,000 and that she believed it was about 200,000. And so, do you have any number that you prefer to use, or an estimate of your own?
Okay, first let me just tell you how does the Ministry of the Health Ministry in Gaza acquires its numbers, and why do we feel like we keep circulating, but we always go back to that number? And this is how they do it. When a body arrives to the hospital, that the identity of that person is verified, and he's added to some kind of a registry. At the end of the day, all the clinics, all the hospitals communicate that number to a central record. And in the morning or late at night, the Ministry of Health comes and says the number of those killed and wounded has reached this because they are the ones who are verified. But here's the issue. Many of these hospitals have been destroyed, therefore, the records of those who have been counted but not added hasn't been added. Number two, many of the identities hasn't been verified. Number three, you still have the number says 14,000 missing. It should be a lot higher than that, simply because it has frozen at 15,000 for months now. So it's seen that the missing is a whole different category that has not yet been updated or added. Additionally, people who are dying from easily curable diseases as direct result of these are not counted, and so forth and so on. But I'll tell you why number has indeed be a lot closer to the Lancet Medical Journal number that says somewhere about 186,000. I think this is the number they said. If the war was to stop last July, so it would be significantly higher. Simply because I was under the impression as a myself that I have lost a disproportionate number of my relatives in the war compared to others. But then with time, I began speaking to other Gazans, and then you realize that many of them have lost many more of their relatives than I have. I mean, the last count I had of my relatives were 56, but that was over a year ago. And that includes my sister, includes cousins, their families, and so forth. There is a new estimation by family members in Gaza that it might have exceeded 120. Okay, so now you have people who say they've lost more than, and it seems every average Gazan has lost dozens of relatives. How is it possible that a population of 2.3 million that have lost at a personal level, everybody has lost dozens, that it actually adds up to 56,000? So, unfortunately, tragically, sadly, after the war is over, especially I would say in the first few weeks, we're gonna make some horrific discoveries regarding how many people in Gaza have indeed been killed as a result of the war.
I am very concerned about that as well, and something I've been trying to warn a lot of my fellow Americans of, that we really don't understand the horrors here. And a part of that is because one of the categories where you've had a massive amount of Israeli murders is of Palestinian journalists. I believe one of the last numbers I read, it was edging up close to 250 Palestinian journalists have been killed by Israel. And at least from my perspective, it does seem that this is starting to make a dent in the amount of information that's getting out of Gaza, particularly to people who are only able to access, media that's going to be at least somewhat in English or translatable, right? If somebody is giving an Arabic broadcast, it's just, I don't know what that person is saying, and it's really hard to verify. And so it seems to me that Israel has maybe even intentionally targeted younger journalists and many English speaking journalists in Gaza. And what's your opinion of this? Do you think it's like really cut down on the amount of reporting that we're getting from the Strip?
I want to believe that this is not the case, and maybe this is my own wishful thinking. But just one thing about the number of journalists. These are journalists who have been verified as professional journalists because of Ministry of Information. The number is a lot higher than this, Kyle, because it includes numerous bloggers and writers who did not operate and function in public space as journalists, but they actually fulfill the role of journalists. Many of them are social media activists. That's a whole different category that hasn't yet been added to this number. But I think there is one thing that I think it's worth pausing at here. During the times in which the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, and many other American and Western, BBC and others had access to Gaza, we actually misunderstood what was going on in Gaza. So when Israel was allowing, and of course, Israel has always been very careful not to allow access to international journalists in Gaza, but when times were relatively different and they did allow a certain number of people, still the information coming out of Gaza in Western media was still largely misinformation. So I mean, this is a huge credit to the Palestinian mind, the Gaza intellectual and journalists and blogger and social media activists that managed to switch the global understanding of the situation in Palestine using means that are absolute primitive in terms of communication. Don't have access to massive studios and hundreds of millions of dollars of budgets like the New York Times and others. They have their cell phones, they have very simple means of communications, and yet somehow they managed to make the Palestinian narrative win globally. This is very, very important, Kyle. And the reason it's important is that because we can no longer make a claim. For a long time, we were told that Palestinians are a liability to their own cause. They don't know how to speak, they don't know how to communicate their message to the outside world. We need someone to do this job on their behalf. Well, guess what? They have communicated that in English and Arabic and Spanish and French Some of them are actually using AI to translate directly from Arabic and communicate. The output of content coming out of Gaza is just shocking in terms of its ability not only to change in the global perception of Israel. I mean, Gaza has defeated the Zionist narrative like all our collective efforts could not do over the course of 100 years. But not just that, if you look at all the legal documents at the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, even the independent initiatives like the Gaza Tribunal, many others, you're going to find that almost the vast majority of that content is actually being produced by Gaza's own doctors, intellectuals, lawyers, journalists, and so forth and so on. And this is why Israel was keen on criminalizing the Gaza journalists. Any Gaza journalist somehow is a terrorist, works for a terrorist organization. They accuse some of them of being involved in the top seven. I mean, are desperate in their in the desire to tarnish Palestinian journalists because they made a very disturbing discovery that this journalist, whose university degrees don't come from Harvard or Oxford or Yale, but from the Islamic University, Al Azhar University, Khan Yunis University, many of them don't even have degrees. They actually managed to prove that they are the most formidable uh, 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 fighter for the Palestinian narrative than anyone else outside of Gaza. That's the constant attempt at eliminating the Gaza journalists. I hope that it's not true that there's a dearth of information at the Palestine Chronicle. We are constantly opening up the space for young journalists in Gaza to communicate their message, and we are doing everything in our power to ensure that even if that message arrives in the form of short text coming from WhatsApp or whatever, that we turn it into content that become journalistic content and credible content in order for us to ultimately convey the message coming from Gaza to the rest of the world.
Well, that is a little bit of an encouraging answer. And Ramsey, that's one of the reasons I really enjoy reading your articles. And this recent article that you wrote and we published at antiwar.com, The Unyielding Heart of the Palestinian Cause in Gaza, makes me, I guess, a little bit optimistic that Netanyahu isn't just going to get away with the genocide, that he's not going to ethnically cleanse the Palestinian people from Gaza and simply just get to make it greater Israel and pretend like it never happened, that the Palestinian people are still there. They're still fighting, not necessarily fighting in the sense of the way that Al Qassam's is fighting, which they still are, but just every day the struggle to survive, the fact that they still go out and get the food, that they're refusing to leave, that they're sticking to their homeland. And so I just want you to maybe elaborate this on a little bit, how much the 1.8 million or so Palestinians that are still in Gaza really do want to stay in the strip and want to make, cling to their homeland.
Kyle, the context of this story goes much further than Gaza. What we know or we call in history as long history. Long history looks at these kind of cultural phenomenon like Sumud, like the concept of statelessness, and we study it as a political factor, not as a sentimental kind of historical side note. It is a political factor. It's the one that actually ultimately makes the difference. In Palestinian culture, you have this kind of terminology like sumud, like karama, which means dignity, hurriya means freedom, muqawama means resistance. Their application to the collective mind, if you will, of Palestinian society is different than what it means once it's translated. It is something that they embody generation after generation. I made the argument in the beginning that Palestinian resistance cannot be defeated in Gaza, and I wasn't talking about Al Qassam. I was talking about the Palestinian people, and I said that Palestinians will not be pushed to leave Gaza, and so far I am still proven to be right, and simply because there is something that we have neglected while trying to study the so-called Arab-Israeli conflict or the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. We always look at numbers. We always look at statistics. We always compare military powers. Well, what do the Palestinians have? I mean, practically nothing. They manufacture their own bombs in tunnels from the leftover Israeli bombs that are being thrown at them. So there is really no shot that could possibly explain the disproportionate power that Palestinians have from a military point of view compared to that of the Israelis. But why are they still there? Why are they still fighting? Now we are talking about functional political language here. We are not talking sentiments. Israel wants them out, but they are not out. Israel wants them to surrender, but they haven't surrendered. What keeps them going? And that's where Western media, Western academia, and the overall understanding of the situation in Palestine has missed over the course of many years of study, and that is the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people are the critical, most important weapon, if you will, that allowed Palestinian culture, Palestinian society to survive for this long. You know, for sure, it's not the leadership of the Palestinian people. We have a collaborating leadership with Israel that is based in Ramallah. They are actually working actively with with the Israelis to crack down political dissent. So if it's not the leadership, where does this come from? Where is this essence of what makes the Palestinians who they are today? Where does that come from? The secret is the Palestinian people. And one thing I just like to add to this, that sadly, the Israelis understood that as well. Many of us did not appreciate this fact, but the Israelis did. This is why Yoav Gallant, the Israeli Minister of Defense, at the time, the very beginning of the war, I think it was October 8th, when he declared that that there will be no food, no water, no medicine, and so forth. That there's going to be a complete shutdown. And that's why Netanyahu launched an actual genocide on ordinary Palestinians. That's why Herzog, I leave it when Herzog refers to them as human animals, and there are no innocent people in Gaza, and so forth and so on. They knew in their mind that the fight and the war is not against Hamas, is not against the socialist movements, it is not against any particular faction. It is against the Palestinian people. That the backbone of Gaza society is just the steadfastness of the Palestinians. So all of this, they are just gambling on the hope that there is going to be at one point a moment in which the Palestinian people will collectively cry. And I don't think that moment is going to happen.
So, Dr. Baroud, the last question I have for you today is, we just had this, what I guess some people are calling the 12-day war in the Middle East between Israel, the United States, and Iran. And of course, there's a lot of analysis on this and what this means for the future, particularly of the Iranians. But what does it mean, if anything, impact do you think it has on the people of Gaza? I guess it doesn't seem to me that maybe strategically Iran inflicted any blow on the IDF that's really going to have to cause them to re-strategize how they're fighting in Gaza. But at the same time, I know there's a lot of other factors in how these conflicts play out and how they weigh on each other.
What is happening in Gaza should have not happened. From a geopolitical point of view, when we were looking at the region before the genocide, no one thought that Gaza could ever possibly be a geopolitical factor in any way. I'm talking about a group of people who have been living under this seemingly perpetual siege, lacking everything, including freedom of movement. The vast majority of them never even left Gaza in their lives. Very small space, about 181 square miles. And yet Gaza become the most important geopolitical spot on earth. And no one has ever expected that Yemen, where people are dying in large numbers from cholera and malnutrition and civil war and so on, could ever become another significant geopolitical factor. This is something I think political scientists are going to be kind of mulling over for a very long time. How did these things happen? Nobody spoke about it. Nobody thought that this possible political scenario will ever become a scenario. We were always looking at Iran. Iran and then everybody else. And the reason we were looking at Iran is because the Israelis wanted us to look at Iran. Immediately, in fact, even before the US invasion of Iraq in 2003, Netanyahu was telling the Americans in various congressional, Senate hearings, and in the media that Iran is even a bigger problem. Iran is as dangerous, if even more dangerous than Iraq. And immediately after the war, he began this campaign with the help of all of his allies in the United States to tell the Americans that Iran should be next. And they did everything in their power, the conservatives, documents, think tanks, everything, in order for him to push this narrative that Iran has to be the next obstacle in the face of Israel's hegemony in the region. It has to be eliminated. Later, the Americans developed the term the Great Middle East. We need to build a Middle East that has space and room for Israel and nobody else. So they have been talking about this for a very, very long time, and finally they have their moment. And not only the Israelis are directly or have directly attacked Iran, but they did manage to find an American president who is willing to buy into this, even if at a somewhat limited scope of actually directly bombing Iran. This is the new Middle East that Netanyahu wants, but the outcome is not at all what the Israelis wanted and what the Americans wanted. And now the New York Times, CNN, Associated Press, and others are telling us Iranians' nuclear facilities are largely intact. They have been delayed maybe by a few months. And this new Middle East, this greater Middle East, the one that Netanyahu is, I think there's a single speech that Netanyahu has given for years and years in which he did not mention the word the Middle East. We will change the face of the Middle East. And as of late, we are changing. So there's the active element here. The change is already happening. Well, the war has taken place and the new Middle East hasn't emerged as yet. So linking this back to Gaza, will there be enough sanity in the United States? I have very little hope in Israel, by the way, but enough sanity in the United States and in Europe that they would say, you know what, we played your game, this greater new Middle East, and it has completely and utterly failed. And we have nothing but undermining the international legal system we have created, undermining the international political balances that we have built in the Middle East. And now you have nothing but more genocide. So hopefully, we're going to start seeing kind of a change in the discourse on Gaza coming from the United States and from Europe that would say to Netanyahu, enough is enough.
Well, I think you're right on that last part. And the little bit of good news I have is it does seem that that discourse has started among the average Americans. It's just our elected leaders. It doesn't reflect anywhere in Congress. There's still just so much Israeli influence, particularly on Capitol Hill and now in the White House. But that's all the time we have for today. Dr. Baroud, thank you so much for joining the show. Everybody, go and check out the work that Palestine Chronicle is doing. It's absolutely an invaluable resource to understand what's going on in Palestine right now. And then, of course, all of Ramzy's work, ramzybaroud.net. Thank you, and I hope you'll come back on the show in the future.